Let me ask you a question. So for the listeners, explain for one, like high level NATO, right? Because I don't think a lot of people know what NATO is, even though we hear it, and then explain how NATO fits into all this, because I've seen a lot on the right wing. Their talking point is that, well, if only, the United States would have sided with Russia in terms of their stance on Ukraine and NATO, none of this would have happened. So explain what NATO is for the listeners, and then explain how NATO is playing to this, at least according to different talking points.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to World War II for a little bit. You have to understand that World War II basically reshaped our international system as it exists today. Okay, it was such a traumatic event. It changed the progress of the world. And so there were a lot of institutions that came out of World War II. And the fact that depending on who you talk to, the way that security alliances did or didn't work in World War II, the decision makers and stakeholders wanted to make sure that something like that never happens again, right? So NATO is a security alliance among certain countries. And so not everyone is a member of NATO. And that is the key, that's the rub with Ukraine, right? That's the rub with Ukraine. Ukraine is not a NATO member, which is why we cannot physically assist. We can give them weapons, we can give them money, we can come to their aid in terms of sanctions packages, but they are not a NATO member, which means there is no commitment with the NATO partners to physically back up Ukraine with material weapons and bodies on the ground. So the other side of the argument is, well, if peace is what we're after anyway, and if maybe there could be some semblance of two states that can exist simultaneously, then why not look to that as a solution versus not listening to Putin and not maybe kind of negotiating with him. And then, maybe we wouldn't be in this position. The main structure of the international system, I know people are hearing this word sovereignty left, right, and center. I've gotten so many texts like, what does sovereignty mean? Yeah. Sovereignty means this is mine and you can't cross this line. Right. Exactly. The same way people, ready to like go crazy with somebody who parks in their garage. Exactly. Can you imagine somebody rolling up to your country and saying, oh no, this part is mine? No. Right. So sovereignty is basically the entire framework for how this international system is put together, right? That came a lot earlier before World War II. And it's this idea that there are legally established boundaries and that another country, another state, as we say in international relations, another state cannot illegally invade your territorial boundaries, okay? That is what a sovereign state means, is that you are protected within the boundaries of your territory and no one can just come in and tell you what to do. So if we continue to let Putin just chop off, different parts of Ukraine and essentially try to reassemble the USSR, then what does that say about sovereignty? Are we committed to it or are we not committed to it, right? And then also one last quick point, again, about World War II in 1939, I would be remiss if I didn't say that although 1939, the start of World War II, is not exactly the same thing as what's happening right now, the argument that Putin is using is exactly the same. This grievance about territorial lands that belong to Russia, and that the people there, the Russian-speaking people there, are under threat, under attack. And if any of you have heard from the homie Terrell Starr, he will tell you, as a Black man, I would not be in a country where there were Nazis running around. So no, Ukraine is not a Nazi state. They're not, you know what I mean? So this kind of line of argumentation, it's convoluted at best, but it also has very close, it definitely resonates with the start of World War II.
Okay. And callers, this is the no judgment zone. So if you have questions and you want to hear from an expert who speaks our language, has the credentials, call in 866-801-8255. This is probably going to be one of the only opportunities you have to ask an expert, okay, who's on MSNBC, all those, everybody likes to see Black folks on the mainstream stuff. She's on that, and she's talking to us, the Black folks, on SiriusXM Urban View. So call in 866-801-8255. Now, yesterday I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered, and General Honore, I don't know if I said that right. You're familiar with him. Honore. He scared the shit out of me. Okay. And I know he's a general, and I know your background is peace and his background is war. So obviously I'm probably going to have different takes on this. But what he said, and maybe I just haven't been watching enough news. I don't know, because I was busy yesterday. But what he said, it sounded a lot more stark in terms of the impact to us in here in the United States. And we've been in wars, in the past several decades. We've had invasions in the past several decades, and life has gone on in America. And I'm not asking you to confirm his view, but what struck me from what he was saying is that we would have to, quote unquote, suck it up, and we got to deal with what's going to happen, and he has this deep, authoritative voice. And it was like, whoa, I knew we was going to have gas prices. I'm fortunate enough to have Tesla now. I ain't got to worry about gas. I'll be driving by the gas station. I'm like, oh, that sucks. But anyway.
You said that sucks for you.
That sucks. Oh, shit. Gas is high. But electricity's high too, though. So I know about the gas part, right? But from what General Honore, say that for me again.
Honore.
Okay. I'm always butchering people's names. I butcher a lot of words, but I'm especially bad at names. Honore. I just said it wrong again, didn't I?
Honore.
Honore. General Honore. Okay. What he was saying is that things are going to get intense for us here in America. I don't know if you share that view, but can you tell me your perspective of the impacts we are, possibly going to see in terms of the way that we go about our lives, or, for instance, shortages on energy or gas or anything like that? What is can you talk about a little bit historically in times of war, right? Talk about that. And then what do you think we would see now if this were to escalate or drag on?
That's a great question. And I'm so happy to be on this platform talking about this particularly because, I'll answer it this way. As a Black woman in this space, as a civilian in this space, I am always asked, well, Black people have tons of things that we need to think about domestically. So why should we even worry about what's happening in Ukraine? There's been wars before. So why is this one different? And I am so happy that for whatever reason, God and the ancestors called me right now to this moment to be the person to talk about this. So
amen.
One of the reasons I was just kind of called to this work, I'm a big believer of, faith and trusting the journey, is I remember growing up, hearing my daddy's stories about Vietnam. Both of my parents are military, so they're set. I have a big military family. My papa was in Korea, and he fought in Korea. So I remember my daddy telling me stories about his experiences in the Air Force in Vietnam. He served 2 tours, and the world in which I grew up in New Orleans, like all of this ties together, I promise. The world in which I grew up in New Orleans was very international focused. The nuns were from Ireland. We learned multiple languages. The cultures are just kind of really sewn together. And I feel like the school that I went to was very open to opening these little Black kids' eyes to the rest of the world. So I grew up with my dad's knowledge about Vietnam, in my head, even bringing home some Vietnam dishes and speaking a little bit of Vietnamese, plus this kind of this backdrop of kind of like international stuff going on in the school that I went to. And so I kind of grew up thinking about the world, right? And so when you live in a place like New Orleans, and if you have spidey sense about certain things, I was just always curious, like, how did all this happen? All of these cultures coming together, the food, our accents and all these different things. Like, how did this happen? So I've always had questions about integration in the world, So once I started along my path to having more of an international lens, it all started because I was looking at domestic things like politics, race, class, religion,
right,
and realizing that, wait, these things that we're going through here have a direct impact on what's happening out in the world. And what's happening out in the world usually gets reverberated back to us.
Mhm.
And if you're not paying attention to it, you don't see it. And so I just started paying closer attention to it, right? So I say all that to say that I had some sort of interest in the world very, very early on. And once I made that turn towards broadening out my interest, I started to see the world very differently. And I started to really understand how what happens here has a direct impact on what gets exported out. And then it has a tendency of circling back, right? So yes, gas, I live in LA, gas is already $5. Gas is already high.
Mm-hmm.
I am not looking forward to paying more at the gas pump. I do not have a Tesla, so, it sucks for me. But what I was speaking to earlier about our entanglements with Russia. So, Russia is responsible for exporting wheat to many countries around the world.
You said, what was that, meat or wheat?
Wheat.
Oh, okay.
So it has a direct impact to the dinner table, right? I've been talking a lot about the dinner table, the domestic dinner table, the Russian dinner table, the Ukrainian dinner table, the global dinner table. Wheat is a staple, right? Wheat is even a staple in dog food. I know because my dog was allergic to wheat. Anyway, so wheat is essential, right?
Yes,
and so that is just one example of how, we're going to feel it a little bit more than just at the gas pump. And because of all of these kind of entanglements, these economic and financial entanglements that we have, with Russia, in addition to the reality of wheat, and we're already having supply chain issues. So all of these things stack on top of each other, right? So we're definitely going to feel a bit of a pinch, and God forbid if there is another strong variant of COVID, and we have to revert, to some degree, to some level of being back inside again, all of these things add up, right? So in ways in which we thought we didn't feel the wars before, we did. But like I said, if you're not paying attention to it, right? Because when World War II was happening around the world, America had to step up and produce a lot of the munitions and build tanks and all these things, so we don't know what's going to happen. This thing is just getting started. And some people are hoping that it has a quick end. And then there are a lot of military experts saying it will not have a quick end, right? So we will feel the impact. It will get spun in a very negative way. But this situation is very different from, say, us going into Afghanistan or us going into Iraq. This has the potential of completely reshaping the entire international system as we know it since World War II. And that, there could be some good and bad things from that. So
okay. Ooh.
I know it's a lot.
That's a lot. You lay a lot on this, but I so appreciate it because I didn't know nothing about Russia and wheat. So this is so informative. And we have several calls, James, Kevin, Robert. What I'm going to do, I'm going to take a break so that we can go through the calls without interruption. And, folks, if y'all heard something you want to ask Nola about, if you had your own questions, call in 866-801-8255. We're going to be taking calls with Nola on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. Clay Kane Show on SiriusXM Urban View. This is Reecie Colbert filling in for my guy, Clay Kane, on the Clay Kane Show, SiriusXM Urban View. I am joined by the great Nola Haynes, national security and foreign policy expert who was breaking it down on this Russia-Ukraine conflict, giving us so much great information. The phone lines are blowing up. So I'm going to ask y'all to keep it quick. And Noah's going to keep it quick. And we're going to get through all of your calls. So let's start off with Kevin from Pennsylvania. What you got? First time caller.
Hey. Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. How are you?
All right. Thanks, Ms. Kane, for stopping by and sharing your expertise with us. I know I appreciate it. I guess I'm quite sure many other listeners do. And thank you, young lady, for being the narrative of this platform. We really appreciate you. You guys do excellent work. My question is, I'm very limited on knowledge. To be a sovereign nation such as Ukraine, as part of that deal, do they have to disarm or not make any more nuclear weapons to be considered a sovereign nation?
Yes, yes and no. So you're referring particularly to the Budapest Memorandum, and that particular agreement. Yes, Ukraine had to fork over a lot of their weapons in that particular agreement, but to be a sovereign nation, not necessarily. You don't have to necessarily enter an agreement like that. But when you have countries breaking away, when you have new kind of independent countries, there are different types of agreements that are crafted. So it depends on, what the stipulations of the agreements are. But sovereign in and of itself just means that you are a legally recognized state. And when I say state, I mean country.
Understand. And my last point, question, if I can ask you, and this is just your opinion. I'll just use this example. I listen to this platform, this station from 6 o'clock in the morning to the close of my day. And it's Donald Trump. Earlier, before your podcast, Madison asked people if he thought Putin committed acts of war against people. And my question for you is Donald Trump here in the States, how come it seems that the things that he does, he has no accountability for any of his actions, just on the civil and legal aspects of things? Could you have an answer or advice you can give me to kind of understand why he seems to be able to, in short term, get away with doing whatever he likes to do?
I'll say two things about that. So I understand the frustration. It does absolutely seem like he can say and do whatever he wants to, but I am not a lawyer, but I will say there are lawyers, who are making sure that, Donald Trump, his organization are being held accountable for very specific things. And although I am not a lawyer, I will say my limited knowledge about the legal system, it works very slowly and it can be frustrating. And then my second point I'll make is, we live in a country of laws, freedom of speech. Freedom of speech guarantees people many freedoms, that can be infuriating, that some people can interpret as threatening language. But how are we defining that? So living in a country with a lot of laws and a lot of high ideals, it is frustrating when someone takes advantage of those things, but he is being held accountable. Yes, he is still free to say whatever it is that he wants to say, but I know that there are a lot of people thinking about this morning, noon, and night, and there are people doing things about it.
Thank you, Robert. Oh, and not Robert, I'm sorry. This is Kevin. Thank you, Kevin, for calling in. And honestly, losing the election was the best way of accountability for Trump. Okay. He does not get to continue going on, completely disregarding the law, doing whatever the hell he want to do. Whatever he's saying, he's as the disgraced, twice impeached ex-president, and we want to keep it that way. Okay. We have so many calls. I'm going to go back to back with 3 people. So when I call upon you, just say your question and you're going to have to get off the stage. Okay, because I think 3 of them are about the same thing. And then Nola at the end of these 3 calls will answer and try to figure out how we can pull this all together. So let's start off with Keith in Delaware. What you got?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. My question is it too late at this point for Ukraine to be a part of NATO? Is that something that could be done at this point? Or if that is done, could that possibly start like World War III? Because then we have to go in and defend the nation.
Okay. Thank you, Keith, for your question. Nola's going to get to that. Joy, Atlanta, can you ask your question?
Hi. I was wondering why Ukraine is not a part of NATO. And I was also wondering if this would be happening if Donald Trump would have been elected as, the president.
Okay. Thank you, Joy. Are you a first-time caller? Thank you for calling in. And then last but not least, Inga in Maryland.
Hi. Yeah. Hey, Reecie, I love you.
Thank you.
My question is, I've been hearing the reason why some of this, besides the ridiculousness of the Nazis, because we got Nazis here, so he can come rescue them here. But the ridiculous, I've been hearing that because NATO keeps encroaching further and further on Putin's territory, and that's why this is taking place.
Okay. Nola, I'm sorry, that was a lot, but I was like, okay, they all sound like in the same family. So can you break it down about why are they a part of NATO? Can they join NATO? And what is all the stuff about NATO?
Mm-hmm. Well, interestingly enough, the conversation about Ukraine and NATO. So there's a stipulation to join NATO. You cannot have any contested land disputes, essentially. And so, Crimea has been annexed or occupied since 2014, right? So in terms of just the legal requirements for a state to enter NATO, that is a huge point of contention, that is holding up this whole process with Ukraine and NATO. In terms of would this be happening if Donald Trump was the president? I want to say something very clearly as a person in the national security community. In 2018, when the Helsinki meeting happened, when the former president went on national television, international television, and aligned with Putin's word over his entire national security apparatus, that was a sad, sad moment for our country. At that moment, we gave up all of our bargaining power. We gave up our strength. We gave up our commitment to, to his own agencies, his own people, his own intelligence officers who go out there in the world, people you never hear about, and put their lives at risk every single day. The way in which the Biden administration had such great intelligence, that doesn't come, at a small price. There are live, real people in the world gathering intelligence. Right. And to the point about, about would Putin, advance, he wouldn't have to, because Donald Trump would have given him Ukraine, right? But not as a negotiating tool, more than there's more alignment ideologically with Trump and Putin. That's a very big difference from him being a master statesman. He admires Putin. He admires his dictator qualities. He admires the fact that he doesn't have a House and a Senate that he has to go to for every little thing, that Putin can do whatever he wants to. He's president for life. These are things that are attractive to Donald Trump, right? So let's not get that twisted, okay? And then is it because that NATO is further encroaching on Eastern Europe? No. That is part of the smoke and mirrors of the situation. And depending on where you're getting your information from, I know that that's part of the narrative. Mm-hmm. Nate, you join NATO. It's kind of like, if you want to join a sorority or join a fraternity, there's paperwork you have to do. There's a process that you have to go through. It's not like, NATO can just pull up and say, oh, we're going to park all of our military assets here. That's not how that works. Right. So Ukraine wanting to be part of NATO is Ukraine's decision, right? And what this is really about is the fact that Putin does not in any way respect Ukraine, and how dare Ukraine, who he doesn't even think should have been a sovereign country in the first place, leaves the Russian fold in terms of political alliances and want to be a democratic nation aligned with NATO. How dare Ukraine, right? And so he's seeing it as, okay, if they do this, and there are other there are other countries in that group of Eastern European countries who have joined, then what will happen to his power? What will happen to his impact on that region of the world?
Right. Thank you so much for breaking that down. I know that was a lot to try to pack in. But yeah, I mean, this whole notion of encroaching on Putin, Ukraine is a solid landmass, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not like they're going to creep over. Like they're politically, I mean, they're geographically located where they're geographically located. So that's just a weird notion anyway. All right, let's go to Kim in New Jersey, first time caller. What you got?
Yeah, Hello, I'm excited to be talking to Nola from Nola. Thanks for taking my call.
Hey.
I wanted to find out more of a question about posturing and precedent. So if Putin were to be successful with this, would this then cause other countries to say, okay, I see how he did this, I want to move forward? For instance, like China with Taiwan. Could this set a precedent for other countries to move forward and do the same thing? That's it.
That's a great question. And, many people are asking that question. I don't like commenting on parts of the world where I don't have a level of expertise. I'm definitely not a China expert, but there have been many experts ask this question. And it's an absolute possibility, especially since China has made public statements that it's, willing to be a security partner with Russia, right? It is going to be its largest importer of their energy and gas. So they've entered trade agreements, they've entered security agreements to some degree. But, China has said that they will stand with Russia, which puts it in a precarious situation, just like all of these big countries, they're all intertwined economically, financially. It's not, all of these situations are layered.
Right. Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.
Let's go to Joe in Maryland. Hey, Joe.
Hello, how you doing? Good day, everyone. Reecie, you're off the chain. I just love listening to you when Clay have you on your show, and I hope that one day soon you have your own show.
Thank you.
Anyway, and Ms. Nola, it's nice to hear you bring us the facts in clear evidence. Clear terms that we can understand. Anyway, I don't want to drift away from the point. But my thing is that, to me, there's a kind of an overarching similarity here between what was done, what Russia is doing now in Ukraine, and what we did in Afghanistan and Iraq. If I'm wrong, will you clear that up for me, please?
Very interesting. So Iraq too, and Afghanistan were all about the fallout from 9/11, which is a very different situation from Russia going into Ukraine simply because Putin doesn't believe that Ukraine should be a sovereign country. Those aren't the reasons we went into Afghanistan and Iraq. So the motivations are very different. And working in the Afghanistan space right now, especially on the resettlement side, I can say that, there is a huge concern that the people who, allied with us for 20 years, who we are still working with to get out to safety, that because of what's happening in Ukraine and Russia right now, that Afghanistan might get sidelined. So Afghanistan is a very kind of close to my heart. So I can say, that there are different circumstances, and it's unfortunate that whoever is framing it that way, that, it's the same thing that the US did, they are intentionally leaving out a lot of detail there.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe, for calling in. One of the things I hear is, kind of people saying that, well, what Putin does, everybody does it, like the United States nation builds and this, and I think that they're oversimplifying and drawing parity where things are, and I'm not like, oh, whatever we did it and we were justified. I'm not saying that by any means, but I don't think people are picking up on some of the nuances of overtaking a sovereign country as your own. I don't think that what we do is necessarily the right thing to do, but we aren't saying, okay, now Afghanistan is a US territory, now we might go and plunder their oil and do all kind of stuff, in Iraq, stuff like that, but it's not exactly the same. Again, not justifying it, but it's not exactly the same. Okay, let's see. I had somebody, Elliot's been waiting for a while from New Jersey. Elliot, what you got?
Hello, yes. I was just calling because I keep hearing there's no Nazis and the Ukraine thing. So I just want to ask her, is there an Azov battalion that been working with the Ukrainian in the east part of the country.
Can you
They're killing-
repeat that? You broke up a little bit, Elliot. Say that question again.
I said, is it the Azov battalion that's been in Ukraine, that's a part of the conflict of the war that's been going on in eastern Ukraine for the past 7-8 years?
Mhm.
I've read a bunch of different articles from, I'd say, legitimate news companies and stuff like that. And they're saying that they've been there and we've been supplying the weapons. And like, so to hear people just flat out say, no, there's no neo-Nazis. I mean, we have them here. They may have them in Russia, but is it true, or is it just the stories that we're reading and seeing and stories that came up from when this whole conflict started in the Donbass region? Like, there's no truth to it at all?
Thank you for your question, Elliot. So first and foremost, as an academic, my job is to report out facts. I am not a journalist. I am not a personality. I only trade in facts. And part of that fact gathering process is to listen to people that are on the ground. And I mentioned him earlier, Terrell Starr, who is a Black foreign correspondent in Ukraine right now, and Malcolm Nance, who was just recently there. I was on a panel with them both. And I love what Terrell said. He spent time in Ukraine, he spent time in Russia. And he said, there are no Nazis here. I am a Black man. I would not be in a country, in a state where there were neo-Nazis. Now, what he did do was contrast that to his time in Russia, where he said he stopped counting after 30 in terms of police harassment. How many times he was harassed by the police. He said he stopped counting at 30. Not once in all of his years he's been in Ukraine has he been harassed by the police. And so I can only go by, what they are saying, and especially with the racial component. If there's some Nazis around, Black people gonna know it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm going to go ahead and trust the reliable sources on the ground with that, and then also trust our U.S. intelligence. I think that is wildly fabricated.
Yeah, and can I just interject, because I believe I know kind of what Elliot was referring to. I have seen reports specifically about like far right militias who assisted the Ukrainian army during various military things, particularly against, Russian aggression, if I'm not mistaken. So I do kind of understand the source of that. But Elliot, to be clear, two things can be true at once. There can be neo-Nazis who are far-right militias. We have those same kind of far-right militias in the United States, the kind that were threatening Gretchen Whitmer and trying to blow her ass up. So this isn't like a concept that is foreign. It is something that exists. However, there is a difference between far-right militias who are armed and the leadership of the country. The fact is, Ukraine has a Jewish president. His family were victims of, Nazis. So there is no there's no neo-Nazi governing, okay, that's happening. In fact, the far right candidates in Ukraine got 3% of the vote. All right, that's less than half the white nationalist party that we got over here. Okay, so this is what they do in terms of propaganda, in terms of disinformation. Disinformation doesn't mean that every part of it is untrue. What it means is that it's presented in a way to give a misleading perception. And I spoke about this yesterday, and I've been speaking about this. I think one of the smart things they did with this whole denazifying narrative and is that who can defend Nazis, right? So people who are very, very casual, don't know anything about it, they hear neo-Nazis, they're like, oh hell no, we're not siding with Ukraine. Putin is right on this one. So it's a propaganda tactic to try to undermine Ukrainian, the Ukrainian position. Don't fall for it. I appreciate the question. I appreciate that you may have read accurate things about the existence of far right militias, but there is a huge difference between militias and the government of a country. Sometimes it ain't that much of a difference in our country, but I'm saying, because we had a lot of elected officials and sheriffs and stuff like that at the January 6th overthrow, but in Ukraine, they're miles apart. So appreciate the question. All right, we have a lot of questions. I'm not going to be able to answer these questions, Cher. I'm not going to be able to answer them if Nola's not here. So no, I don't want to put you on the spot. Feel free to say I got to go at 2. But if you can hold on to like 2:15, can you stay on? Okay,
I
good.
that,
Ooh, Nola is gonna grace us with an extra 15 minutes, y'all, because I'm gonna have to be like, y'all can just hang up and call back and talk about something else. But we do have a few questions. We got to take a break in a couple of minutes. Let's see. Richard, you've been holding on for a while. Make it quick. From Delaware, Richard, what you got?
Yeah, how you doing? I see this whole thing as being dangerous as far as soldiers is concerned, and I still can't understand why Russia's oil has anything to do with our price of oil here in the States. We don't buy oil from Russia, and we blew it down there in Venezuela. So I don't understand where this whole oil price hike is coming from, with the exception of the oil refineries needing to pump out more fuel for these cars and trucks. And I'm just afraid for our soldiers and stuff out there now, because we're dealing with authoritarianism, and we're not dealing with normal type of democracy going on today. Putin got his ego stuck up, and we're in his backyard over there. If they were over here doing the same thing, I'd be like up in arms too. But this is what they got going on. So I don't understand why we would be involved in any kind of war that they have going on, because I'm afraid that our soldiers are going to be getting killed over people's egos and attitudes. That's all right.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Richard. So you asked about 3 or 4 different questions there. So I'm going to try to quickly compact them in terms of why our oil is impacted. I don't know how long you've been listening to the show, but we were talking about earlier just how interconnected all of these major countries are with each other, right? And because this has such an impact on Europe, and what has an impact on Europe absolutely has an impact on us. It's just all of these kind of dominoes or I don't want to say dominoes are falling, but I do want to say that they are all interconnected, right? So by the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, by Germany pulling the trigger on that, they know that they're going to have to eat that economic cost, right? And this is why President Biden was doing shuttle diplomacy around the world, trying to line up different oil and energy partners, including, Africa, because they knew that the way that oil was distributed around the world was going to shift if Russia invaded Ukraine.
Right.
And yes, egos and all of that stuff are involved. Unfortunately, the international system likes to think that a leader of a country is going to only act in the best interest of their state and not in their own self-interest. That's not how that works, And when you are dealing with someone, a leader like Putin, who is aggrieved by the fall of the USSR, aggrieved by the fact that Ukraine wants to align more closely to the West than the East, and aggrieved because he feels like the rest of the world was just dismissing him and not listening to him. Yes, it's ego, but it becomes more than that when you have power, when you have nuclear capabilities, right? This is an imperialistic move, period.
Right.
Period.
Right. Woo, Nola.
This is an imperialistic move. I keep bringing up the Kenyan ambassador's speech at the UN because Ambassador Kamani was like, listen, if you're from an African country, we've seen this. We know what colonialism looks like. We know the moves of imperialism. This is an imperialistic move. This is a lot more than a leader making a decision, some sort of so-called rational decision. Right. There's nothing rational about this decision. Right. And okay, so
park the rest of that thought.
Yeah,
all right.
Sorry.
Nola, you've been dropping gems. You've been dropping. I'm amazed at how many calls we have. I had to combine them. I've never had to do that. Nola's sticking with us on the other side of this break. Clay Kane Show. I'm Reecie Colbert filling in for Clay Kane. Be right back with more Nola Haynes. Just a little bit more, but we got it. Welcome back to the Clay Kane Show on SiriusXM Urban View. It's your girl, Reecie Colbert, filling in for Clay, who is out today. I am joined here with the great Nola Haynes, who has been kicking out so much knowledge. I feel smarter already. Do y'all feel smarter? I know you do. Calling in, answering your questions. We have a couple of calls to get to before we let her go. But Nola, one thing that you specialize in, your work is also about women and centering women in the national security space. Yep. Talk a little bit about the impact of this Ukraine-Russia conflict on women in particular.
Thank you so much for asking me that question. Yes, I care very deeply about the impact that war has on women. At Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security, our mission is to advance, to advance peace, mostly because we know that women tend to bear the brunt of the impacts of war, right? So one very tangible thing is there's tons of conversations about sanctions, and their effectiveness. And one of the measures that I've been paying close attention to is the fact that before COVID, after Russia annexed Crimea, that food prices in Russia over time escalated to around 30%. And so to my mind, that number has a direct impact on women, because I'm not necessarily trying to lean into gender stereotypes, but in a country like Russia, where, a movement like Me Too or the women's rights movement is just kind of like put down before it can even get going, and where domestic violence protections have been rolled back in 2017, that number in food escalation prices has a direct impact on the dinner table and what's happening, in the stores when you go to do food shopping and take care of your kids or perhaps your elderly parents. We think about at WCAPS, we think about all the others in the equation. We think about the theys in this equation. We think about the disabled folks in this equation. Like, when war happens, the most vulnerable groups are not always taken care of. They're left very vulnerable. So I'm very concerned about that in terms of the women in Russia. And then I'm also concerned, if Russia does, gain a stronghold in Ukraine, that thriving democracy, that growing democracy, that all of those protections and very positive moves forward for women will be, move backwards. I mean, we're seeing it in many ways in our own country, so right. I'm very, 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 very concerned about the safety and the psychological, the mental, emotional health of women and them taking care of their families in such an extreme environment.
That's an interesting and really appropriate perspective, because I think when we talk about sanctions and we talk about, they're obviously designed to be a punishment of sorts, right? To try to, it's not a preventative measure at this point anymore. Right. Putin has invaded Ukraine, but there's still a toll that you're getting at on the actual people who are not a part of Putin's decision. So I think that's a really, really good a point to make out, because I think Cori Bush, she tweeted something which she deleted about the inhumane sanctions, and a lot of people were dragging her because a lot of people don't like when you criticize the moves of the administration, and I kind of saw where they were coming from, but listening to you, it does give me a different perspective on that is part of the consideration that we should be understanding, and we shouldn't just be completely callous to that. Whether you believe it's a necessary evil to try to, prevent a military escalation, there's still an impact to everyday people in all of these countries.
I mean, by the Nord Stream 2, being stopped. I mean, that was a $15 billion potentially, over $15 billion of revenue for Russia, and that's people with real jobs, having to work on that pipeline. So absolutely real people get impacted. But, when you have a dictator where you're not necessarily concerned about legal elections, your only goal is wanting to suppress. You're
Right.
not trying to incorporate public opinion into your decision making.
Mhm.
Therefore, you're not thinking about the hardships that your people are going to go through. And Russians, listen, they've had a very long history of just really showing up for their country
Mhm.
and really just taking the brunt of whatever decision was being made by a leader. And they're very tough and they're very strong people. But at the end of the day, people who say that sanctions do not have an impact, it depends on where you're looking, right? And I am always looking in the households, and I am always looking to see, how a country treats women. And when I was doing research on domestic violence protections being rolled back in Russia in 2017, how can you necessarily say in theory that it's a equal society, but on paper, your actions, your policies, your laws are saying something very different. So, I don't want to belabor the point, but absolutely, we need to think about the impact that this will have on women.
Absolutely. And that's why we have people like you, experts like you, who have that intersectional lens as opposed to just war and peace and only thinking about things in narrow focuses. And that helps us take into consideration a variety of things that we might not naturally be thinking about because we don't have that focus. Okay, 2 quick calls before I let you go.
Okay.
Maurice, North Carolina, you're up. You're on air with Nola Haynes.
Good afternoon, ladies, and I'm enjoying the show. Thank you, Reecie. Thank you, Ms. Haynes, for coming on. My question is about our interests. We recently got out of 2 wars with Iraq and Afghanistan, and I'm wondering what is the interest of Putin with trying to take over Ukraine, and what does the United States and NATO have to do with this conflict that's going on now?
Thank you for your question. I hate to be histrionic, but if you know anything about how World War II started, it was by letting a dictator who said that they wanted to reclaim their ancestral lands, basically open the door and give them the keys, and then we have World War II, so this is a very similar moment in that if there is no showing of strength to protect, especially a country that's interested in becoming a NATO member, although there are some, legal things that are preventing that at the moment, part of a security alliance is showing up for people, right? And so while that's part of it, the larger narrative is we cannot continue to let Putin run roughshod. And I mentioned this before. This is the 4th time, Putin has done something very similar to this since 1999. So it's kind of like, if you don't stand up to the bully's just going to keep bullying.
Right.
And it's really just that simple. And so while we don't have direct involvement in terms of putting US troops inside of Ukraine, we are definitely doing all that we can because we recognize this is a moment. If you let the bully keep bullying, it's going to go to the next country and the next country and the next country and the next country. And Europe has had a long history of war, long history of war. That's why all of these security alliances exist. That's why NATO exists. It's for something like this, if it happens, to stop it very quickly before it turns into something greater.
Yeah. And I think we take for granted in this country how much conflict is happening outside of this country. We have our own version of conflict, Jay. We got the police on our ass all the time. We got a whole lot of stuff that's going on But I mean, that's a different level versus, dodging missiles and other stuff that they got going on in other countries. Okay, last question. Al and Virginia, before Nola Haynes gets off air, what's your question? First time caller.
Yes, hi, thank you. I wanted to quickly talk about what could possibly be behind this conquest of Russia within analogy that hopefully all of us can relate to, from The Godfather 1 and 2, how the Sollozzo assailed the Corleone family and was really trying to wipe them out, and it took the powers that be some time to figure out that it was actually another power that was behind him that had allied with the guy that was out front for a grand plan to annihilate the Corleone family. So what if Russia is out front right now and behind them is China, North Korea, Iran, and their grand scheme is to wipe out the West vis-a-vis the United States? This could be a lot deeper than we're all willing to grasp right now. What if? That's all I want to say.
I will answer that, making it sound a little less conspiratorial. Thank you for the question, brother. So in one regard, you are not wrong, but it's not like some hidden Illuminati kind of, it's not that. This is one of the reasons why the US is concerned, because there's a lot on the table, regarding Russia and things that Russia is involved in. And I will come back to, the whole arms control component of our relationship with Russia, right? And so you have Iran, you have Iran looking at this, if Russia isn't respecting treaties and instruments that are in place, there are other states saying, well, wait, should I arm? Should I become a nuclear state? Or, so all of this reverberates, right? So the links that you are making, watching this, what does that mean for China and Taiwan, right? Or watching this, what does this mean for South Korea and North Korea? It's all in play, but it's not a conspiracy. More than what we are witnessing is really a shift in the international order. And if we do not show up, and I want to be very plain here, if the US does not show up, it's a lot more at stake than just having Putin have some territory in Ukraine. No, right now, and I hate to say it because it sounds so cheesy, it really is a self-fulfilling prophecy of East versus West, democracy versus autocracy and dictatorships, right? International law versus rogue actors. A lot is at stake right now. And if we want to enjoy any level of democracy, continued democracy, we have to make a stand now, and not just abroad, but also domestically. We cannot be an undivided America right now. That makes no sense, because essentially you were saying you are aligning with someone who violated international law and illegally invaded a country. Right. How did it work? America, that's you? Like, excuse me? Like, that is what's at stake. And Black folks are factoring largely into reminding people, hello, we need to remind you of the definition of patriot. Because what y'all working with right now, that ain't it. Like, for real. Right. So a lot is at stake, and I'm happy to be alive at this moment, to be a Black woman, to have a different lens and perspective to add to this conversation, because if something goes way wrong in what's happening right now in Europe, the first communities that are always impacted the most are of color. That is the connection between this domestic situation and the foreign situation. It is the connection between national security and foreign policy. Our national security has been disrupted by violence, white supremacy. It is destabilizing. All of this connects. So if we are stronger as a country, we won't look like we are vulnerable to the sharks waiting in the water. Do not get it twisted.
Okay, Nola. Woo. Okay, because I think people haven't been getting it. And I think if you ain't got it after that, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. If you ain't got it after what she just broke down, because shit rolls downhill. We know that. Okay. People already mad about gas and bacon being high.
You said and bacon.
And wheat, now wheat about to be high.
Yeah.
Because I eat wheat bread. Okay. So listen, Nola, you have been a treasure of knowledge. You have spoken in a way that I think we all are enriched by and smarter by. And I appreciate the time you have devoted, the very precious time that you have in this very busy moment, to SiriusXM Urban View, the Clay Nation audience. Tell folks how to keep in contact with you and your brilliant mind and all of your insight, because this is not a 1 day, 2 day story. People need to know what you have to say on this. So tell the audience how to follow you.
So on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, it's all Nola Haynes. I made it very, very simple. And I'm actually putting together some, I'm really, really bad at like putting all of my media stuff in one place. You know, like people have been calling me, Nola, you need to do this, you need to do this. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna get to it. Yeah. So, and I do have a link tree, set up now. And that's also connected to my my Twitter and my Instagram, so you can keep up with the things that I'm doing. And later on today, I will be on MSNBC on Nicole Wallace's show in the 5 o'clock hour. So
Nola
and Tiffany Cross tomorrow morning.
Okay. Yes. More Black girl magic. Okay.
Yes.
Nola, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great day.
You too. Thank you. It was a pleasure meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.